Foundational Truths, a first principles analysis of Dr. Mary Aiken's cyberpsychology. The work of Dr. Mary Aiken, particularly in the cyber effect and related discussions on life in cyberspace, is fundamentally an application of first principles, thinking to the digital world. Her approach strips away the superficial aspects of technology, the apps, the platforms, the hardware, to examine the irreducible elements, human psychology, and the nature of cyberspace itself. The entire conglomerate of her work can be distilled into three foundational truths that govern all aspects of human behavior online, from cybercrime to social interaction. These three first principles are: cyberspace is a unique psychological environment. It is not merely a communication tool, but a distinct social and psychological space that fundamentally alters human cognition, emotion, and perception. The digital self is a liberated, yet unanchored identity. Online anonymity and disinhibition create a unique digital self, often disconnected from real-world consequences, profoundly affecting moral and social behavior. The human factor is the critical vulnerability. All issues in cyberspace, whether crime, bullying, or security breaches, ultimately originate from and are exploitable through the predictable, unadapted psychology of the human being. This summary will elaborate on these three principles as the philosophical bedrock of Aiken's cyberpsychology. First principle: cyberspace is a unique psychological environment, the space effect. The most fundamental truth underpinning Dr. Aiken's analysis is the rejection of the notion that cyberspace is just another medium like television or the telephone. It is instead a unique psychological environment that imposes its own physical, social, and cognitive laws on its inhabitants. This environment exerts a measurable cyber effect, altering perception and behavior. A. The irreducibility of spatio-temporal disruption. The digital realm is defined by its ability to collapse traditional boundaries of space and time, a feature that is not a convenience but a psychological force. Spatial collapse, near-instant globality. In the physical world, distance provides a natural firewall for social conflict. A dispute remains geographically localized. In cyberspace, the proximity of all users is effectively zero. A conflict, a rumor, or a harmful image can instantaneously travel the globe. The psychological truth here is that the human brain evolved to manage social groups within a limited physical and temporal radius, Dunbar's number. Cyberspace instantly scales this social sphere to billions, a cognitive load the brain is ill-equipped to handle, leading to emotional overload, reduced empathy, and a sense of constant low-level vigilance. Temporal collapse, the frictionless now. The lag between thought and action is nearly eliminated. Communication is synchronous, demands are immediate, and gratification is on demand. This constant stimulation and expectation of instant response works against the brain's slower, more deliberative prefrontal cortex, favoring faster, more emotional, and impulsive limbic system responses. This creates a state of psychological immediacy where delayed gratification, a cornerstone of mature social behavior and prudence, is continuously eroded. This is the seed for impulsivity in cybercrime, rapid-fire social conflict, and addictive digital habits. B. The foundational truth of the sensory vacuum. The experience of cyberspace is, at its core, sensory deprivation in the context of human, social interaction. Unlike a face-to-face interaction which engages pheromones, microexpressions, posture, and tone, online interaction is filtered primarily through text and, secondarily, through highly stylized, non-nuanced images, video, empathy, filtration. The absence of the full suite of sensory cues creates an empathy vacuum. The physical experience of seeing distress or pain in another person, the foundational trigger for human empathy, is absent. The recipient of an aggressive email or a piece of cyberbullying is an abstraction. This makes acts of aggression easier to commit because the immediate tangible consequence on the victim is invisible to the aggressor. The foundational truth is, distance from the perceived suffering of others lowers the psychological barrier to aggressive or antisocial behavior. hyperreality, and the filter bubble. Cyberspace is not a mirror of reality. It is a meticulously curated and algorithmically reinforced reflection of one's own biases, preferences, and fears. This hyperreality is built on selective presentation, where one's own life, or the lives of others, is only presented in its best light. The psychological consequence is a chronic state of social comparison, leading to anxiety, depression, and a skewed benchmark for real-world success. The principle is, a constant feed of optimized, unrealistic data sets a false baseline for subjective well-being. C. The principle of systemic vulnerability, the infrastructure of risk. Aiken's work establishes that the digital environment is inherently and structurally conducive to certain kinds of harm. The inherent record. Every action, every word, every data point is recorded, stored, and searchable, a concept Aiken calls the digital footprint. This is an irreversible psychological burden. Children growing up today must contend with the certainty that every youthful mistake is a potential historical weapon. The first principle here is that cyberspace eliminates the human right to forget, replacing it with permanent, searchable history. The architecture of trust exploitation. The systems are built to prioritize connectivity and efficiency over security and privacy. The human instinct is to trust and connect. The digital infrastructure exploits this by demanding continuous, uncritical acceptance of new terms, platforms, and data-sharing agreements. This structural vulnerability is a fundamental design flaw where the system is optimized for data extraction rather than human protection. First principle. The digital self is a liberated yet unanchored identity, the disinhibition effect. The second core truth of Dr. Aiken's cyberpsychology addresses the shift in human identity when operating online. The digital self is the construct of personality and behavior that emerges when a person is decoupled from the constraints of their physical identity. This principle is most vividly explained through the concept of the online disinhibition effect, ODE, but its roots are deeper and more foundational. A. The irreducible nature of psychological anonymity. Anonymity in cyberspace is not a feature. It is a superpower of psychological invisibility. It is the single most powerful catalyst for altered behavior. Dissociative anonymity, the mask. When a user is truly anonymous, or uses an avatar, alias, they psychologically dissociate their online actions from their physical self. The body, which experiences fear of consequence, social rejection, and physical reprisal, is removed from the equation. The foundation is, by removing the body, the mechanism of social fear is disabled, allowing for behavior the physical self would never risk. This is the psychological truth behind flaming, trolling, and many forms of organized cybercrime, where the risk-reward calculation is drastically altered by perceived safety. The power of the blank slate. Anonymity offers a psychological reset, allowing users to shed identities they feel constrained by in the real world, e.g., career, age, gender, social status, and experiment with new ones. While this can be therapeutic for identity exploration, it is a risk principle because it allows individuals to manifest the parts of their personality that are typically suppressed by social norms. The core principle is that the human psyche contains repressed antisocial or transgressive impulses, and anonymity is the key that unlocks them. B. The truth of benign and toxic disinhibition. The online disinhibition effect, ODE, is often cited in the context of cyberbullying and trolling, but Aiken's work applies a first principles lens to show that it is a neutral force with two distinct outcomes. Benign disinhibition, the liberator. This is the positive outcome, where the removal of social anxiety and status barriers allows a user to be more open, share personal feelings, express vulnerability, and offer help without fear of judgment. This is the foundation of online support groups and therapeutic chat forums. The principle, a reduction in social scrutiny, liberates prosocial communication. Toxic disinhibition, the aggressor. This is the negative outcome, where the reduction in accountability leads to rudeness, aggression, hatred, and criminal behavior. This is directly tied to the empathy vacuum discussed earlier. The lack of sensory feedback combines with a lack of personal accountability. The foundational truth is that toxic disinhibition is the default behavior when the costs of civility, self-control, effort, outweigh the perceived rewards, social acceptance, non-punishment. C. The principle of identity, commodification and fragmentation. The need to be recognized and valued is an irreducible human need. In cyberspace, identity itself becomes a commodity, measured by likes, followers, and views. The external locus of self-worth, the digital self's value, is externally validated and quantifiably unstable. The individual shifts from an internal locus of self-worth, who I am, to an external locus, how many people endorse who I project. The psychological truth is, when subjective self-worth is replaced by objective, measurable social feedback, the self becomes perpetually anxious and dependent on the system for validation. Identity fragmentation, the multiverse self. Individuals often maintain separate, distinct, and sometimes contradictory identities across different platforms: professional, personal, anonymous, gaming, etc. This fragmentation, while offering flexibility, strains the cohesive self-narrative, essential for mental health. The core principle: the digital environment encourages the fragmentation of the self into context-specific persona, creating a burden of cognitive and emotional dissonance. First principle: the human factor is the critical vulnerability, the security effect. Aiken's most practical and urgent principle, and one vital for her work with Europol and in cybersecurity, is the recognition that the greatest vulnerability in the entire digital ecosystem is not the code but the user. Cybercrime is a game of psychology, not programming. A. The irreducible principle of cognitive exploitation. Cyber attacks succeed primarily not through technical genius, but through the exploitation of simple, predictable human cognitive biases and emotional responses, a process known as social engineering. The principle of heuristic reliance. The human mind relies on shortcuts, heuristics, to navigate a complex world. Scammers and cybercriminals exploit this by creating scenarios that trigger automatic, non-analytical responses. Authority heuristic. A scam email appearing to be from a CEO or tax agency triggers automatic compliance. Scarcity, urgency, heuristic. The limited time offer or immediate security alert triggers a panic response that bypasses critical thinking. Familiarity. Heuristic. Using familiar logos, names, or conversational styles to establish instant, false trust. The foundational truth is, the efficiency of the human mind is the primary weakness that cybercriminals exploit. They hack the mind, not the machine. B. The foundational truth of digital complacency, the good enough barrier. Aiken's work highlights a critical psychological barrier to cybersecurity, the widespread human tendency toward risk minimization and digital complacency. The problem of abstract risk. Cyber risk is intangible. You cannot smell a virus or physically see a breach until the damage is done. The human brain is poorly wired to assess non-physical, delayed, and abstract threats. People are more likely to worry about a plane crash than a data breach, even though the latter is statistically far more common. The principle is, the subjective perception of risk is inversely proportional to the immediacy and tangibility of the threat. This leads to lazy password habits, reluctance to use multi-factor authentication, and click-through acceptance of risky terms. The fatigue of constant vigilance, the demands of digital security, constant updates, unique passwords, new threat models, create a state of alertness fatigue. The human mind seeks to conserve cognitive energy. Eventually, people default to the path of least resistance. The principle is, in a saturated threat environment, the human psyche will default to denial and inaction to preserve cognitive resources. C. The principle of digital dualism and cognitive adaptation. The path forward, as suggested by the first principles of her work, is an urgent need for human cognitive adaptation to the unique environment of cyberspace. DECODE, dual faith for the digital age. Drawing a parallel to the psychological concept of dual faith, a term you use for your Croatian ventures, Aiken suggests a form of digital devoevry is required. We must simultaneously live in and respect the laws of both the physical world, where consequences are personal and immediate, and the digital world, where consequences are permanent and scalable. This is the philosophical shift from treating online life as not real to recognizing its pervasive reality. The call for cyber-groundedness. The ultimate synthesis of her work is a call for individuals and institutions to re-anchor the digital self to the real self. Education must focus on the psychological reality of the digital environment, teaching the truth about disinhibition, the permanence of the digital footprint, and the tactics of cognitive exploitation. The final irreducible principle, the only robust defense against the unique psychological effects of cyberspace, is a conscious, educated, and continuously grounded awareness of the self within the virtual space. By synthesizing these three core principles, the unique psychological space, the liberated identity, and the critical human vulnerability, Dr. Mary Aiken's work forms a cohesive first principles-based foundation for the entire field of cyberpsychology, defining the irreducible psychological laws of our life in the digital age,